I'm delighted to re-welcome a guest who joined us last year. For me, it's always a good sign when a guest is happy to come back. Delighted to welcome Nick Cowell, Partner Strategy Consulting Lead, Banking and Capital Markets at Deloitte. And our topic is identifying the true digital champions in retail banking. A warm welcome for Nick, please.
I think I may be the last speaker before lunch, so thank you for bearing with me. By way of introduction, my name's Nick. I lead Deloitte's strategy group for our banking industry, and one of my roles globally is we have a team of researchers who do a lot of work in various dimensions around retail banking. One of our kind of marquee exercises is what we call our digital banking maturity study. And we run that, and we've done that for the last decade, every 2 years, where we look to get a pulse on evolution, innovation, and trends within retail banking globally as it pertains to digital. And what I wanted to do today is take you through kind of our most recent findings and really kind of talk about what we see as the kind of common characteristics of a digital champion. So just to frame what digital banking maturity is, so essentially we have about 200 field researchers over the course of about 9 months, working in the field with about 350 financial services organizations who offer retail or consumer banking services. These range from large multinational kind of global logos that everyone would recognize, through to community banks, through to credit unions, building societies, some of the largest neo or digital challenger banks, right through to Fintechs who under license are kind of disintermediating the value chain. What we have these researchers doing is actually going through across web, mobile channels, opening accounts, originating products, performing day-to-day banking transactions, payments, transfers, etc., even closing accounts, to assess things like the maturity, efficiency of the customer experience, to assess things around availability of features and functionality, and to really, against our rubric, start to identify where we're seeing real innovation and what that kind of looks like. So we assess, across really 17 different kind of steps within like various customer journeys. We look at over 1,000 different features, and what we do against kind of our scoring mechanism, which looks at availability of features, which looks at fluidity and efficiency of different customer journeys, also looks at perceived value of innovation and value and how we can tie that to kind of balance sheet impact. We are able to identify who are the quote unquote true digital champions in retail banking. Now, we're not going to kind of go into name dropping today, but one of the things that we were able to pull out is all of the digital champions in that 350 bank sample size, and it's a global study. What makes them unique remains unique to them, but there's kind of 6 common characteristics which we see all of them exhibit, and I would like to take you through them today. So the first kind of trend is all of the digital champions have really indexed back to evolution of experience and features versus revolution. And what this means is, for the first time since we've run this exercise in a decade, we've actually seen far more capital investment in mobile app as a channel versus web, which I think goes to show banks are starting to recognize that really need to invest in the channel where our retail banking customers want to sit and want to kind of interact. We've also seen this kind of concept of retrenchment, where historically it was really about quantity of features, like what can we do in the app? Let's just flood it with different features, flood it with different types of functionality. And whether this is a expense management play, or whether this is really around rethinking quantity versus actual quality of experience and servicing journey, we've seen this shift to actually reducing number of features and really rethinking the design to let's expose the features which really matter at the point in the journey that the kind of the customers most want to use them. We've also seen this concept of how can we use a self-serve channel as a very effective way to engage and a very actually effective way to cross-sell, which I'll come to in a moment. The second theme we saw a lot of was around this concept of convenience. And I think all of the digital champions, quote unquote, which again is that top 10% in our sample size, they recognize that convenience is actually a real commodity when it comes to digital banking. Things such as really true end-to-end account opening via mobile app. Things such as true product origination end-to-end journeys for maybe more complex product like structured lending products or products where there's historically a need for more kind of manual intervention, documentation, etc. Things like near real-time payments or the ability to engage in-app with assistant, whether that's virtual or human-enabled. These are all of the kind of the traits around convenience that digital champions are really looking to innovate and invest in within their app. From a consumer or end user perspective, a lot of the expectations are actually being influenced by adjacent industries, whether that's e-commerce, social media, etc. And the real innovators in banking are looking at the innovators in those industries and pulling kind of the best features, the best functionality, the best experience into kind of their app design. What I think is interesting when we look at just, one of those areas of quote unquote convenience around the ability to truly open a basic kind of vanilla checking or vanilla debit product via mobile app, only around 50% of the banks in our sample size allowed you to do that. I mean, I think that's pretty much a given. We would assume, particularly in a market like the UK, that remote account opening via mobile app is a table stakes. But when you look globally, it's actually there's a long way to go. Whereas 100% of the digital champions offer those kind of features and functionality. I think another thing when it comes to convenience, we've seen a step change. Historically, a lot of the larger banks were looking at how do we build capabilities in-house. The digital champions are really embracing the partner ecosystem and pulling best-of-breed capabilities into their journeys to drive that kind of convenience, whether it's digital identity, authentication, whether it's the ability to track progress, the ability to quickly get responses to questions as you're going through a particular journey, whether it's the ability to pause a journey and revisit all in the same channel. These are areas which digital champions are really pioneering and investing in because the data shows that it drives better engagement and actually drives more positive behavior around product origination and actual product usage. And here's just some examples which I think should be fairly familiar to everyone who banks within this market, but in other markets, there's a lot of laggards when it comes to this. The third theme is this concept of super app or marketplace, and it's this whole notion around the platformification of banking. Should my bank be more than a bank? One thing we start to see the digital champions really pioneering is this concept of value-added services. So shifting away to say, actually, my balance sheet is purely just banking interest income and non-interest income products and services, and moving to how can I drive better engagement and primacy with my customers? And that doesn't necessarily mean I have to give stuff away for free. So this whole concept of what does my customer really need? And how can I either provide it based on what I offer or work with a partner to do the same? There's some really interesting examples we see in the small business or sole proprietor space where there'll be propositions which, yes, have kind of the debit and credit needs of a business owner, but then we'll also offer things through third parties such as insurance, integration into accounting services, help with tax support, legal support and beyond. And that's all commercialized by the bank, whether that's through referral fees, whether that's through bundles or consumption-based. And this is an area where we're really seeing some of the digital champions start to innovate, and it starts to get very market-specific. So, for example, in the developing economies, we've actually started to see banks and digital champions act as intermediaries between the end consumer and potentially the government. markets where government services are maybe not meeting the needs of consumers, the bank steps in as an intermediary. You can now apply for a passport, renew your passport through your bank. You can pay fines or parking tickets, etc. Or in markets and societies where there's kind of true central digital identity, the bank can integrate into those government systems to drive better, more accurate and quicker kind of decision making around like credit needs. We worked with a bank in South Africa where they recognized that there was a real need for more reliable energy source, as an example. The government provided utilities were really falling short of what the consumer needed. So what does the bank do? As part of residential mortgage offering and as part of their commercial real estate portfolio, they actually embedded an offering where you could also put solar panels on your house, or you could put solar panels on your commercial property, and the economics were just embedded into the overall cost of the mortgage. So again, kind of an example of banks really innovating to bring more value-added services to their customers, but also expanding their revenue streams on their balance sheet. And what we found is, when we look at that sample size of the banks we looked at for this exercise, the digital champions, the top 10%, are almost 2.5 times more likely to offer value-added services than the rest of the set. And we see, really interesting examples which are either built around, use the small business example, or other kind of product sets. So some of the digital champions we looked at in the last 2 years have really indexed on digitizing the mortgage process. Historically, globally, this has been a very cumbersome, difficult process to really streamline, given the volume of documentation, given the volume of steps, etc. But the banks who've cracked it, they've also gone beyond and looked at, okay, if we digitize this, if we have the mature APIs, what are some of the other products and services that we could offer and actually monetize against? So we worked with a client who cracked the digitization of kind of your general mortgage process, and also as part of that are offering their borrowers things like moving services, even access to interior design services, all as part of their mortgage proposition. And it becomes kind of a self-select as you go through the mortgage application on what other additional services you'd like. And again, it's kind of priced in. So we're continuing to see this concept of value-added services or marketplace or super app services being really championed by the digital champions and really invested in innovating in. And our research shows this is not just a gimmick. This is actually having material impact in terms of additional revenue streams on the balance sheet. The fourth out of the 6 kind of common themes of the digital champion is really around customer advisory. Now that term advice, is a pretty, it's a pretty broad term. That can mean everything from contextual nudges in the app to help you spend better, manage your money better, right through to true white glove investor advisor services where you're talking about investment needs or very specific advice around segment or product. For retail banking and for the digital champions in retail banking, we really see a focus in 2 areas. One is around what we call PFM or personal financial management. And then the other is how you can use contextual kind of data to drive certain behaviors. So PFM, personal financial management, I think a lot of the neobanks in the UK have really done a good job around this. Think about things such as being able to set your self-set budgeting tools, self-set rules around saving targets through kind of your account hierarchy. So think of things like pockets as a good example of that. Being able to run analytics on historical transactions to identify certain patterns of spend, or even things such as being able to query or annotate individual transactions. So over time, where available, that AI or machine learning in the back end kind of drive contextual recommendations. And then we're seeing banks who really have the right data quality and the right analytics tools, being able to take this kind of concept and actually take it to the next level, which is really around cross-selling. So based on spend patterns, how can you nudge for next best action or next best product? Really good example here may be the bank runs analytics on your credit card spend, and based on certain merchant types or certain spend categories, they can then recommend in near real time, actually, you should use this card because you can maximize rewards based on your spending behavior. So I think this is where we'll continue to see the digital champions invest, which is how do we actually start to contextually cross-sell based on individual data in the channel mobile app that customers use more frequently. The fifth theme is around seeking familiar experiences. So I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of consumer or retail banking end user expectation is actually, when it comes to digital, is set really by adjacent industries. And what we're seeing is some of the digital champions in banking really pull on more innovative features and types of functionality, which have been championed by digital champions in adjacent industries, whether that's Spotify, Uber, Grab, Alibaba, list goes on. And so we're seeing for digital champions features such as generating QR codes for payments, for peer-to-peer payments, things such as being able to annotate transactions and then actually self-categorize transactions, things such as being able to add commentary to individual transactions, so machine learning can pick up, hey, this transaction was a business expense versus a personal expense, becoming very commonplace. Using things like geolocation or Bluetooth to help with payments or more accurate spend, or even in certain markets we're seeing geolocation being used as an indicator of fraud, as an example. So it can tell based on location patterns. It can tell based on things like a very large transaction in a location which you're not usually in. Hey, this may be fraud. Will automatically freeze your card. And then we're also seeing the gamification of banking. So talked about spending goals earlier, but being able to kind of reward or promote or publish when you're reaching certain goals. We're seeing a lot of the digital champions. The landing page is fully customizable on your homepage to what you want to see when you want to see it. The content of feeds. We're also seeing this kind of concept of how do we make banking more emotive, and so pulling on some of the trends that we've seen in social media, where it's instead of clicks, it's swipes, or I bank with a neobank that instead of denoting my different accounts by number or name, it's actually by picture. So for my kids' savings accounts, it's just photos of them, and I can just swipe between the accounts. So again, it's driving that engagement and driving that that kind of emotive connection proves pretty powerful. Another really good example, I don't know how many people in the room use Monzo, but they've liberally borrowed from Spotify this whole concept of, Spotify Wrapped. It will give you kind of your analytics for the past 12 months of what you've listened to and different kind of categories and insights. Monzo does the same with banking, which is, it's fun, but it's also a subconscious or a subtle way of kind of reminding you of here's kind of certain spend behaviors and here's potentially where you want to do things slightly differently next year. And then the final trend that we saw from the digital champions ubiquitously was around this concept of hyper-personalized communication. I think in a mass market retail banking environment, we see a lot of generic, stale propositions, which are, the only thing distinguishable between one or the other is maybe the brand name and the cosmetics around it. Where the digital champions are really starting to excel is around engagement, and that can look like many different things. Being able to just take very simple transactional or demographic information and play that back to the customer. We hear a lot, my bank knows a lot about me, but tells me very little. So how can you start to provide prompts, nudges, analytics, which helps with better financial behavior, whether that's spend, save, and beyond. And we're also seeing, the digital champions are far more likely, I think 2.5 times more likely to use the app as the primary communication channel versus other channels. So whether that's things such as promoting offers, whether that's things such as potentially alerting to fraud, or other insights around spend, again, they're prioritizing that kind of engagement and retention kind of in the app. And we're seeing, particularly some of the neobanks who fall in the digital bank category, they're really taking this innovation, to the next frontier. And I think, frankly, that's because one, their DNA is built around kind of experienced customer engagement, and two, quite frankly, they probably have better quality data and better quality analytics tools than maybe larger incumbent banks who are carrying a lot of data and tech debt. So this is just an example of some of the other areas where we're seeing personalized communication, personalized insights, personalized engagement really drive innovation and better experience for the customers. So I think in short, what our latest digital banking maturity study showed us is there's 6 themes which digital champions are really anchoring around, and really traits that they all portray. But I think it also shows us that as end consumers of retail banking services, it's an incredible time for us in terms of optionality and in terms of innovation. For some of the non-digital champions, so particularly the digital laggards, it's a real inflection point in terms of where investment dollars need to go, because we are starting to see this shift away from digital champions have great features, great experience, and we're seeing a lot of exploration of people downloading their apps, creating accounts, to more and more people shifting to the digital champions as their primary banking provider. And we're seeing a shift in balance of kind of market share. And that will continue as the digital champions look to keep pushing the frontiers around product innovation, around bringing in non-bank products and services to diversify their balance sheet, and also pulling on adjacent industries for inspiration around customer engagement and digital innovation. So I think we've got a few minutes for questions. So happy to take any.
We do indeed. Any questions for Nick immediately? I know I have some of my own. We've got one in the middle.
So obviously we're talking mainly here about trends and impacts and what people actually see in their app. I'm interested in the multi-banking aspect and open banking specifically. Mm-hmm. How do you see the adoption of, be it payments or data-related open banking services, not just in the UK, but more broadly as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of it's market specific based on relative maturity of payment infrastructure, regulatory posture. So I do a lot of work in the US, and if you look at things such as your ability in the UK to switch, how easy it is to switch your primary checking or debit account, that's very, very complex in the US, and it creates a different paradigm in kind of competitive posture. So banks there know that actually, once you have an established relationship, to acquire you as a primary customer is very difficult. So how do they lead with next best product as a acquisition tool? So big focus on, as an example, credit cards. Whereas I think here in the UK, open banking, it's somewhat a table stake. And if you don't have the ability and the capabilities within your app or within your proposition, whether that's web or mobile, you are not a digital champion, you're probably a digital laggard. I think markets are catching up to it, but we're still seeing a massive imbalance depending on the jurisdiction you're banking in.
Thank you. Any further questions from the room? I've got one final one if I can, Nick, and that's going back to the aspect of the super app there. Mm-hmm. Is that going to be the key point of difference, really? Because I know from my perspective, I'd been banking with the same organisation since I was 18. My partner then says, look what I'm using. And there was night and day difference between the two apps. Is it having that point of difference that could be the differentiating factor for who is going to succeed in the future?
I personally believe for some of the new entrants, they have to offer it to drive just the right economics on their balance sheet. I also think some of the incumbent banks will have to think about the products and services they offer to be far more holistic. And I think this is going to be very true in the small and medium business banking space, because business owners will look to providers who can offer far more than just debit and credit products. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting space to watch. I also think, and it comes back to the comment I made on the open banking question, some of it is market specific. And I think where we see some of these kind of marketplace or super app concepts really doing well is where there's significant deficiencies in adjacent industries or government services which the bank can step into and just be the intermediary and like drive the right customer engagement.
Okay, well, I can say for sure that I always look forward to having you on my stages. I describe you as a time traveller speaker because you stuff so much into a short space of time. I've got no idea how you do it. So anyway, we're about to go to our next networking break, but for now, our thanks to Nick.
Thank you.